Hey up everyone, I've had a couple of people ask me how to do the boundary between two different blocks of colour in fur. So when you get animals that have got different coloured markings, doing the boundary between them. So since I do a lot of dogs like border collies and what have you, which have different coloured markings just like that, I thought I'd use a few of these as examples on how I do the boundaries between different colours. And I'll be using these paintings you can see now as examples. Before we get to painting, I'm just going to show you some close-ups of my actual dog so we can have a closer look at what the fur's actually like on these boundary points between two colours. So this is Wren. She's a 14-year-old chocolate and white border collie, and I'm going to use her as an example first. You can see she's got quite a wonky blaze. This is the middle of her skull, and the blaze comes right around this side. So we've got two examples on this side of her blaze. You can see that the direction of the hair growth is parallel to the direction of the boundary between the white and the brown, and you can see that there's stray hairs, still white hairs that are not actually connected to white, that are bleeding into brown areas. That's Wisp sticking her nose in. And then on this side you can see that the direction of the hair growth is actually at a right angle to the boundary, so the white hairs actually grow into the brown on this side. But yeah, you'll see that it's not just an abrupt transition. You've got quite a few brown hairs bleeding into white and white hairs bleeding into brown along these edges. And if you look on the side of her face, I think I can get her to keep still a minute, you can see it's same again. There's a little border area where there's a lot of mixture of white and brown hairs. So it's not just white and then brown, and you have to really take into account the direction of the hair growth. That is how you make it look quite genuine, is making sure you get the direction of your hair growth correct. This is Sleet. She's a blue Merle 14-year-old border collie, and Wisp's sticking her nose in again. And her blaze is a little bit more central. So if you look at the direction of the hair growth, it's like it fans out. After eyes, it fans out of it, top of head. So you can see the long white hairs grow out into darker areas. A lot of this grey area is actually Merle. It's not black, so it can be a little bit more difficult to see than say with a black and white dog or just a plain brown and white, like Wren is. But there's no abrupt line between your white and your dark area. It's not an abrupt line anywhere. It's really sort of softened by the actual hairs bleeding into each other. And since she insists on being in one, here's Wisp. She's 6 years old, blue Merle, and I'm going to show you her Merle patches, and you can see that again they're not just solid patches with really defined borders. They've got little grey hairs that are, in middle at black areas, and then you've got grey areas and black areas bleeding into each other and what have you. There's no solid blocks of colour really anywhere. And looking at her blaze, she's got quite a thin bit of blaze here between her eyes, and again you can see even on this black side there's a lot of like white and grey hairs that are not actually attached to blaze. And if you look at this patch here, you can see that the direction of hair growth is this way. So you can see that there's grey hairs coming into black on this top end, and then if we go down to the bottom, we've got black hairs going into grey on bottom part of the patch. You can see it again here with this smaller patch. The hair direction is that way obviously, so you've got these grey hairs coming into the top, and then you've got black hairs coming into grey at the bottom of this patch. It's not just like a straight line or anything, it's lots of hairs and clumps of hairs which are bleeding into each other. Like I say, in the direction of the hair growth, which is always going to be important, the direction of hair growth. So moving on to an actual painting, you can see that I've already applied all the underpainting here. and started doing a little bit of modelling. All paper's covered up with paint, and you can see it's still got quite an abrupt transition between the white on muzzle area and then the black on rest of face. So I'm just going to start softening that transition line with some strokes using white paint on a rigger brush. And I'm going to be paying careful attention to the direction of these strokes, because it needs to be the same direction that the air grows in, like I've already explained in them clips when I was showing you my dogs. So some of you might already be familiar with this painting. It's Evie, the border collie, and I did a full time lapse of Evie and posted that a few months ago, and I also used this for the nose tutorial. So anybody who's not seen any of them, I'll link to them above and you can go and have a look at them if you want. So now I'm going to add some darker strokes where we're adding them paler strokes, and this is because you've got like a mixture of darker hairs and white hairs in this particular area. And I don't want to make these dark strokes completely black, because you can see that the fur on that part of the face is reflecting a lot of light, so there's a lot of blue tones and things like that going on in it. I'm just bringing these strokes into the white part from the darker area, still focusing on the direction of hair growth and just trying to define the actual border between the white and black, which you can see to an extent, but it's just not too abrupt a line. So now's the time when I need to really refine that and get it just as it is in photograph. Obviously, because this is a private commission of a specific pet, it needs to look as much like that pet as possible. Not really much room for artistic license when it comes to that kind of thing. So I'm just adding a few darker hairs to that area that's more in shadow, and then I'll move back to the top and just adding these little stray black hairs that come down towards nose. The area just above the nose tends to not have much hair on it at all, so you can see a lot of pigment on that part at muzzle just above the actual nose itself. In this photo, I think the light from above and the fact that the white on muzzle were a little bit overexposed in the reference photo means you can't really see that so much. But dark pigment can come quite far into the areas of white, where you won't be able to see it if there were a lot of white hair there, but because the hair is so sparse in this area, you can see it a little bit more clearly. So now I've moved back to white paint and I'm working on the base of this dog's blaze. Now this dog's not really got much of a blaze. It's just a bit of a stripe of like white hairs mixed in with black hairs. It's not like a solid blaze. You can see that the direction of hair growth fans out here, going down sides at muzzle and towards each of the eyes. And I'm adding more white hairs here that are bleeding more into the darker areas. There's quite a white border going on where you've got a mixture of black and white hairs going on here, especially at the base of the blaze, which, like I say, is not really much of a blaze on this dog. When this dog was born, she probably did have a solid blaze going all the way up her face, and what tends to happen as they grow is that the pigment spreads, the dark pigment, so blazes that are quite thin when they're born can entirely disappear, and blazes that are a little bit thicker can sort of be reduced to this, just like a few white hairs going up the face a little bit. I had a dog myself that were like that. She was born with a thin but solid white stripe, and it were reduced to just like some hairs just like this that went up as far as just above where her eyes were, and then everything further up than that were completely lost as she became an adult dog. So I'm just finishing up on this one now, just adding the last white hairs there using the edge rigger brush to keep them as fine as possible. And I'm just being careful to not overdo it and cover up all them dark hairs that are mingled in with white hairs in this transition area. So now I've moved on to another painting. This is another border collie, Daz, and he belongs to a friend of mine, and I did his painting a few months ago, and I included it in my recent video about realism art, so if you want to have a look at that, I'll link to that above as well. And I'm just working on altering where the actual white ends here, because obviously it was wrong, so I just needed to extend it a little bit before I could continue. And then when that's in the right place, I just start going through similar process to what I did with Evie, adding the strokes in and what have you, so I can develop that transition area between the white area and the black area. And in this painting I've also got a transition between white and tan, and also black and tan as well, which I'm also going to show you. Same process, just using different colours. I'm not too religious with how I stick to my process of doing these things, because it's always going to be slightly different with every subject. It's going to look slightly different, so it's going to need a slightly different approach. The main thing again is to make sure you follow the direction of the air growth. I might do a video in future about the direction of air growth. If that's something that you'd find interesting, then let me know and I'll see about doing it. I mean, it's going to be a little bit different depending on what animal you're doing. It's a little bit different between dogs and cats, for example, and definitely different between like dogs and horses and stuff like that. So just let me know if you think a video like that would be helpful, and I'll see if I can put something together. Always trying to think of different ideas that would be helpful to people. So you'll see me switching between black hairs and white hairs quite a lot here, and I'm often coming back in and covering a lot of white up, and it's just a case of making it look the way I want it to look. So because acrylic's quite forgiving like that you can just keep layering it up. It don't really matter, you can just keep going back and forth until you get the effect that you want to get. I think the only thing is that you need to finish off with your white hairs on top of your black. So if you've not got enough black coming in towards that white, then just put some black in, and then make sure you put some white hairs on top of your black and not black hairs on top of white. It don't work so well. It's always best if you have white hairs on top when you finish off. It has a bit more of a blaze than what Evie had, so there's a little bit of solid white in the centre of his. It's not the widest of blazes, but there is some solid white in the centre of it. It's not just a few little hairs mingled in with black this time. You might sometimes see me come in with my fingernail. Sometimes if I do a little stroke and it goes on a little bit too thick, I might just run my fingernail through it just to narrow it down a little bit again. I sort of use my fingernails as an extra tool. If you're one of these that bites your fingernails or keeps them really short, that's probably not going to be helpful to you. I suppose you can use something similar that's got a narrow edge that you can use in the same way, but I just find using my fingernails quite convenient. Notice on his blaze I always keep the brightest whites for the centre at blaze, and I always keep the edges at blaze just that little bit less bright, because you've got black hairs coming into white hairs there. That's where your transition area is, so you've got a mingling of black and white hairs, and then you've got your solid white in the centre at blaze. So it looks more realistic when you have that edge around it where there's different coloured hairs mixing, rather than just having an abrupt transition between your white and your black. I did spend quite a lot of time on this blaze, partly because the reference photo were taken by myself, so it were a nice good quality reference photo with lots of detail in it, and also because this painting's a little bit bigger than the other two that I'll feature in this video. They were A4 size and this one's A3 size, so when you go bigger you can get a lot more detail in, and you may as well do it because it always looks good when you get more detail in, and it is easier doing detail when you're working bigger. You can also see me altering edge at blaze quite a bit. Sometimes when I looked back at reference photo and it weren't exact to what it should be, and I'd just come back in with some dark and just rectify it again. You can do that as many times as you want until you get it right. It don't really matter if you make a mistake, you can just go over the top of it. I just then come back in with white hairs and make sure that I finish it off using white rather than black like I explained earlier in the video. It just don't look right when you put black hairs on top of white. It's always better with white on top of black. And just take your time, don't rush. I find that listening to things helps when I'm painting, because I can concentrate on painting better, and plus I tend to absorb things better when I'm listening, like documentaries or podcasts, things like that. Anything that I find interesting, I'll stick on and listen to it whilst I'm painting. So now I've moved on to his tan point, so now I'm working on a transition between tan and black, And just like with white and black, I'm doing the black hairs first, getting them in and what have you. I always tend to do the dark coloured hairs first and then do the light coloured hairs on top of them. It's just easier in acrylic. Also, because the hairs are a little bit longer on the side of his face, on his cheek area, than what they are, say, on bridge of his nose, just do these strokes a little bit longer. That's the difference between doing short hair and long hair. Just do strokes that are actually longer. Also, if you note the difference in hair direction in accordance to the actual transition point between tan and black in the two different areas, there's the area that sort of juts up towards the outer corner of his eye, which is further back on his cheek, and then there's the borderline which runs up towards the inner corner of his eye, and on that area the hairs are a little bit more parallel to the actual borderline. And then on the other area that juts up towards the outer corner of his eye, the direction of hair growth is more of a right angle to the actual borderline between black and tan. What that means is that your black strokes actually go straight into your tan. I showed you this on one of my dogs earlier on in video. And then on the other one where the actual hair growth is parallel to the borderline between tan and black, you've just got independent little black hairs that bleed into the tan, and they're not actually connected to the black next to them because they're parallel to them, if you get what I mean. So now I've moved to the area up front of his neck to do his white on his chest and front of his neck and what have you, on his throat, and I'm just going through a similar process to what I did on his face. The area is a little bit longer, so you've just got to do strokes that are a little bit longer, and I'm just going back and forth between black and white, just getting rid of any actual line between two. In this case you'll have lots of white hairs that are overlapping that black. I'm still using a rigger brush here to do this detail. I think it's a number 3 from looking at this footage. I can't actually specifically recall from time, but looking at footage it does look like a number 3. Some of you might remember from previous videos where I flattened the bristles on a rigger brush and then I use each corner once the bristles are flattened to get a finer line. If you're not sure what I mean, then you can have a look at the tutorial about painting a pug where I show you how I actually do this. I'll link to that up above as well. When it comes to brush size, I tend to use a number 3 rigger to get started on fur texture when I want to start putting the first layer of texture in, because you can just get through it a little bit quicker. It holds more paint and you can get the work done that little bit faster. Works a little bit better when you're working on larger areas as well. I tend to move down to like a size 0 when I want to do finer details and finer hairs, you know, on the final layers of the painting. And when I'm doing these white hairs, I also add a little bit of flow improver. It stops it from going transparent like it would if you were just mixing it with water. It keeps it nice and white, but it makes it flow a lot nicer, so it's easier to do hairs and things like that without it breaking up and what have you, because it's just too dry and viscous. So now moving on to the third and last dog. This is Fred, and he's a border collie but also with some bearded collie in him. So he's got a wiry kind of coat, so the border between the white and the black is going to be a little bit different, because painting wiry hair is a little bit different to painting your normal kind of fur, that like what you get on the other two dogs that we've already done. Just normal type dog fur. Wiry hair's a little bit more coarse and it tends to be a little bit more messy and grows in various different directions, and it often has a little bit of a curl to it as well. It's not usually not perfectly straight. When you do your strands, they tend to be a little bit thicker and have a little bit of a curve to them, and they tend to be a bit crisscrossy and things like that, you know, not just all poking in the same direction. They tend to crisscross a lot and be a bit messy, and that's what gives it its wiry appearance. Otherwise, I'm going through a similar process. I'm just working in with blacks first, bringing your black strokes into white and getting rid of that abrupt line between your white and your black. And then coming back in with white and going over that to put your white hairs in. And I finish off with this last layer of white hairs, make them look nice and wiry. They're a little bit longer and they're also quite messy and coarse, like I said, so they're a little bit thicker, and you get some really random looking ones that seem to be growing in odd directions and overlapping other ones and crisscrossing and going in various directions. But anyway, I wanted to just take this opportunity to apologise for the bit of a break between videos. It's been a while since my last upload. I've just been that busy in real life getting actual commissions done and things like that for people. I've also got another video in pipeline. I recently did a painting of a dog and it had quite an interesting looking tongue. Nice lighting effects and things like that, so my next tutorial is going to be how to paint a realistic tongue, so keep an eye out for that. And I'm going to finish this video off by taking you for a little walk in Bluebell Woods with my dogs. No music, just the sound of the woodland. If you want to sit through that, you're welcome. If you don't, then you can switch off now if you want. For them people that live in other parts of the world that don't get to experience an English bluebell wood, it's a good opportunity to just get a feel of what it's like. You'll not get to smell all these scents and wherever you're going on, because it is quite full of pleasant smells at this time of year in a bluebell wood, but you get to see the sights and you get to listen to the sounds, birds singing and things like that. Mostly robins and blackbirds and what have you that you can hear in these clips. Anyway, you might enjoy it, so I'll leave you to it. And thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and I'm always grateful for any constructive comments. Always welcome. And if you want to see more videos like this, then be sure to subscribe as well if you haven't already. I'm going to leave you to it now, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!